This event dates back to July 16, 1054, when Cardinal Humbert, representing the delegation of the Catholic Church, entered the Hagia Sophia Church. He delivered a document to Michael Cerularius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, who was preparing for the feast of Hagia Sophia. After leaving Hagia Sophia, Humbert left Constantinople and returned to Rome. However, the document he delivered declared his excommunication by the Pope. On the same day, a church council convened by the Pope excommunicated those who had excommunicated the Pope. Thus, July 16, 1054, is recorded as the date when an official separation occurred between the Western Church and the Eastern Church. Historians refer to this separation as the Great Schism or the East-West Schism. Although the separation seemed to occur at that moment, its roots actually date back centuries, and throughout the Middle Ages, there was a fundamental debate among Christian clergy about which church had universal superiority. Roman archbishops, or popes, argued that the superiority belonged to the Western Church because they claimed that Peter, one of Jesus' apostles, came to Rome and died there. At this point, a church had been established and he was martyred here. According to the claim of the papacy, Peter was the first Roman archbishop, and those who came after him sat in the papal seat representing him. Jesus himself had appointed Peter as the founder of the church. Additionally, Paul, who made great efforts in spreading Christianity, had come to Rome and was martyred there, just like Peter. According to the Western Church's claim, the bones of both were buried under a church in the Vatican, meaning the Roman Church rose above the two greatest cities of Christianity. According to the papacy, all this was an indication of the universal superiority of the Roman archbishop. In contrast, the Eastern Church asserted its superiority with a more worldly approach. Constantinople was another residence of the empire, and in the pre-Christian Roman religion, emperors were considered the head of religious authority. This tradition continued after the capital moved to Constantinople in the 4th century AD. Emperors like Constantine, Theodosius, Justinian, who spoke and wrote in Greek, abandoned Latin from the 5th century onwards. This situation was straightforward for the Eastern Church. For them, the emperor should almost be superior to all other churches. This ongoing struggle for superiority during the Middle Ages played a significant role in the rift between the Eastern and Western churches. This was not about whose justifications were more reasonable. Both churches wanted to have power over other churches. Up to this point, the conflict seems more political than religious, but there was also a cultural dimension. By 1054, there were some fundamental differences that had been ongoing between the two churches for many years. Some of these seemed simple, but over time, they played a role in the eventual split. For example, the tradition of growing a beard had become a practice in the Eastern Church, while there was no such tradition in the Western Church. In the Eastern Church, clergy could marry, but in the Western Church, they could not. Practices differed in some details. The Western Church had a more dogmatic structure. What the Pope said could not be questioned under any circumstances. In contrast, the Orthodox believed that the Pope was human and could make mistakes. In addition to all this, there was a more significant issue between the two churches. When the Roman Empire split in 395 AD, the borders that emerged were not only political but also cultural. Latin culture was dominant in the West, and they used Latin. In contrast, Greek culture was more influential in the Eastern Church. While the official language of the Western Church was Latin, Greek was valid for the Eastern Church. Even emperors, from the 5th century onwards, abandoned Latin and started to speak and write in Greek. This situation gradually became a significant problem between the two churches because they couldn't understand each other's theological debates. For example, a letter sent from Constantinople in the 5th century remained unanswered in Rome for months because there was no one to translate it. The same situation applied to Constantinople. Letters sent from Rome were in Latin, so they were disregarded as not worth translating. By the 9th century, Some clergy in the Eastern Church argued that the Pope could never have authority over Constantinople because, as they claimed, the parrot spoke Latin. Another point of contention was related to the doctrine of the Trinity, i.e., the formula of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the early years of Christianity, emperors organized a series of councils to achieve consensus on religious matters. These were meetings where senior clergy gathered to discuss religious issues. The first of these was held in 325 AD in Nicaea, organized by Emperor Constantine, to settle the disputes over the nature of Jesus. The formula of the Trinity was clarified at the Council of Constantinople in 381 AD. According to this, the Holy Spirit came from the Father, from God. However, the Western Church at the Council of Toledo in 589 AD changed this formula, accepting that the Holy Spirit came from both the Father and the Son. The reason for this was to increase the importance attributed to Jesus. Thus, the preserved views of the Nicaea Council would be protected. This initially did not lead to a problem between the churches because, due to the aforementioned communication problem, the Eastern Church became aware of this decision years later. However, when they became aware, they expressed their reactions. According to them, this was heresy. Historians call these problems the filioque controversy. The Latin phrase translates to, and from the Son. In the early years of Christianity, there was no hierarchy among churches. Their relationship was generally at the level of exchanging information. However, with decisions made in councils, some churches were considered superior to others and gained certain influences over churches in their regions. These were respectively named the churches of Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. The clergy referred to this system as pentarchy, meaning the rule of five. In the early years of Christian history, the Roman archbishopric was generally considered superior among other archbishoprics. However, over time, emperors increased the importance of Constantinople and began to attract other regional patriarchs to their side to have more religious authority. This inevitably deepened the division between the Eastern and Western churches. In the early years, popes had to submit to political pressure from emperors. Sometimes they even needed the support of the emperor to become pope. This situation continued for several centuries. In 726 AD, Eastern Roman Emperor Leo III initiated a practice called iconoclasm, which prohibited the worship of images of humans and saints. Pope Gregory III vehemently opposed this practice and wrote a letter declaring excommunication for anyone interfering. However, this letter never reached Constantinople due to messengers being arrested in Sicily. In 751, the Lombards began threatening several cities in northern Italy, posing a threat to the Catholic Church. The Frankish king requested help from the papacy. Pope Gregory III, a devout leader, gladly accepted this call and entered Italy with his army, defeating the Lombards. The generosity of the Pope was not limited to this. He declared that he had donated territories extending up to the moon to the papacy. Thus, besides becoming the sole religious authority in the West, the Pope also became the king of a state in the territories of Italy, marking a turning point in Christian history. The process continued with the Pope being declared emperor by the Pope in the year 800. In the same years, Empress Irene, a woman, was on the Eastern Roman throne. This was a significant change at a time when the generally accepted understanding was that the emperor should be male. The declaration of Charlemagne as emperor by the Pope meant the emergence of an emperor residing in the West. Theoretically, superiority was shifting. However, with the accession of Nicephorus I to the throne in 802, the title of the empire was also preserved in the East. Neither the Pope nor the Franks agreed to give up their rights to the title of the empire. This situation led to a further deepening of the division. However, the event that completely severed the ties occurred shortly after the Normans conquered southern Italy. Much of southern Italy fell into the hands of the Normans loyal to the Catholic Church from the 11th century onwards. But there was a problem. The churches in question continued to implement their rituals according to the principles set by the East. In 1050, the Pope issued a decree obliging these churches to switch to Latin rituals. Otherwise, they would all be closed. This decision was met with anger, and in retaliation, the Patriarch declared that all Latin churches in Constantinople would be closed. The dispute between the two sides suddenly escalated and turned into a diplomatic crisis. In June of the year 1054, the Pope sent a delegation led by French cardinals to Constantinople to find a solution. The negotiations between Cardinal Humbert and Patriarch Michael took a negative turn from the beginning. On July 14th, a letter advising submission to the authority of the Pope was given. Additionally, the attitude of the cardinals during the negotiations greatly disturbed the Patriarch. After this, the offended mediator did not accept the Roman delegation for a long time. The cardinal delegation stayed in Constantinople for several more weeks. Eventually, angered by this treatment, Humbert went to Hagia Sophia on the morning of July 16th and left the excommunication document, sealed by the Pope, in front of the Patriarch. This was the last straw. With the support of the Emperor, the Patriarch first threw the cardinal into a game of dice and then excommunicated the delegation that came in exile. With this decision, the Eastern and Western churches were completely separated. Initially, people were not greatly affected by this situation. Western and Eastern Christians maintained good relations in the areas where they lived together. However, over time, tensions between the churches increased. With the Crusades, disagreements among the people intensified, and in 1204, when the Latins captured Constantinople, this disagreement reached its peak. Negotiations conducted over the years to reconcile the churches mostly remained inconclusive. The problem between the Eastern and Western churches remains unresolved today and does not seem to be resolved for many years to come.